Welcome everyone to our sixth Align with ALYN webinar. I am Maayan Aviv, the Executive Director for American Friends of ALYN Hospital, and we have some exciting guests with us today. I will leave it for Joanne Bly, the American Friends of ALYN Hospital Board President, to introduce our speaker today. Joanne, take it away.
Thanks, Maayan. I am pleased to welcome all of you to the sixth in our continuing Align with ALYN series, where we host distinguished speakers to provide updates on all the initiatives at ALYN Hospital, funded in part by you, our donors. And if there are any riders from our recent Wheels of Love ride in Israel on this Zoom call, I'm hoping you are still basking in the joy of a job well done. It was a terrific, terrific ride. If you missed the previous Align with ALYN series, they are available for viewing from the alynus.org webpage or on YouTube at ALYN Hospital Friends. This seminar will be posted there as well. As those of you who have been on previous Zoom sessions know, the American Friends of ALYN motto is our support, their success. You can see it above my head. So again, in the spirit of showing what our support has accomplished at ALYN Hospital, I am thrilled to introduce Dr. ELIEZER Berry, the Deputy Director General of ALYN Hospital and Director of its Department of Respiratory Rehabilitation. The title of this series, you can see it on the screen, is Quality of Life for People Dependent on Technology, including you and me. Improving the quality of life for children who depend on wheelchairs, ventilators, and other assistive technology is part of the ALYN mission. Dr. Berry will also discuss the connection between quality of life and health status for all of us. I had the privilege, when I was just in Israel for Wheels of Love ride, to be given a personal tour of the Respiratory Rehabilitation Department of the hospital by Dr. Berry. And it was amazing to see all the changes since I was at the hospital 3 years ago. Please help me welcome Dr. Berry.
Thanks, Joanne and Maayan, and good evening or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where in the world you are. The title of the topic of quality of life for technology-dependent people is a very fundamental and foundational topic for me. And this evening, I'm going to share with you a research article and a body of research which has really influenced my entire approach towards my work here at ALYN and my entire career as a doctor. It's also had a big impact on me personally as a person. So I'm excited to be able to try and present it to you and explain to you how I see quality of life, particularly for many of my patients, but for all of us as individuals. So we're going to be talking tonight on how we understand quality of life and what we know of quality of life from the medical literature, which has been devoted to this subject. When I say quality of life, I first have to define my terms, and what I'm really speaking about is the subjective nature of quality of life, not the more objective nature. In other words, I'm not talking about how much money do you have or what size house you have, but I'm talking about the feeling that you have inside of you. So I like this definition over here, which defines quality of life as the extent to which life is comfortable or satisfying. So actually a better term is life satisfaction. That's really what I mean when I talk about quality of life. We're talking about life satisfaction. And how can you measure life satisfaction? So here's, I mean, there's many ways of doing it, but here's one tool which is used in the literature. It's called the Campbell scale. And somebody is asked to rank on a scale from 1 to 7, how satisfied they feel about a particular topic. So for example, I'd score a 1 if I felt that I had no life satisfaction, and a 7 if I'm completely satisfied and couldn't be more satisfied. So notice that 4 is exactly in the middle. So in this scale, 4 is neither positive or negative. Anything above 4 is more towards the positive end, and anything below is more towards the negative end. And you can use it as well for sentences such as, I feel that my life is hard or easy, ranked from 1 to 7. So that's that's the tool that I'm going to refer to in this talk. When we measure this score, this Campbell score, and it's been measured many thousands and in fact tens of thousands of times in the States and in Europe, the average score is 5.5. In other words, most people, if asked to rank their life satisfaction from 1 to 7, will give themselves either a 5 or a 6. It's rare that people give themselves a 7. Now, when I speak to students about quality of life, I know that many of them give themselves a 7. But if I speak to older people, that give themselves a 5 or a 6. And the reason for that is because when you monitor this number over time, this is what happens. Your quality of life is the highest when you're a student. It gradually decreases over the course of your life until you reach the age of retirement, and then it goes back up again. This might be a bit depressing for many of you to realize if you're somewhere along this slope over here. But this is what we find. Students have got the highest quality of life, and retired people. I think the reason why it is lower during the period of most of the activity of our life is because of these two elements, family and career. Now, family and career are undoubtedly important. They give our lives meaning, but they're not easy. They don't make our lives easy and enjoyable. They make our lives meaningful. And a lot of people find that family and career are just as much sources of frustration or pressure in their lives, but not sources of enjoyment as much as sources of meaning. So quality of life tends to go down in life until you reach later on in life. The relationship to IQ is interesting because it's been well documented that the relationship between quality of life and IQ is an inverse relationship. The higher your IQ, the lower you will tend to score on quality of life. And if any of you have, for example, spoken to somebody with Down syndrome, you will know that these are often people who are happy, not because they're psychotic or there's something psychologically wrong with them. They have a simple approach to life, and their life satisfaction is clearly at the higher end of the spectrum. So more intelligent people tend to have a lower quality of life subjectively. Now, this is a research paper which had a profound impact on my career as a doctor. It was done by John Bach, who is a rehabilitation doctor in New Jersey. And he studied the life satisfaction of people with Duchenne muscular dystrophy who are all on long-term ventilation. Duchenne is a congenital muscle disease in which over the course of the first 20 years of life, there's a deterioration in muscle function. And usually by the age of 20, it affects only males. These are young men who land up being fully paralyzed and fully ventilator dependent by their early 20s. And John Bach studied this group of patients, and this is how he did it. He took 82 people with Duchenne's, all fully paralyzed, all on home ventilation. They'd been ventilated for an average of 6 years. So these are people who are quite used to being on a ventilator permanently. And he asked them to fill out this Campbell Quality of Life questionnaire to rank from 1 to 7 what their quality of life is. And then what he did was something very interesting. He took as a control group to compare to what these Duchenne's people said. He took as a control group their doctors and nurses, 273 professionals, doctors and nurses, and asked them to fill out the same questionnaire. But he asked them to do it twice. The first time he asked them to fill it out for themselves. What is your quality of life? And the second time he said to them, now I want you to try and guess what your Duchenne's patients are likely to have said. So the professionals filled this questionnaire out twice, once for themselves and once they tried to guess what their patients said. So what emerged from his study? So the doctors gave themselves an average score for quality of life of 5.36 out of 7. And this is interesting because this is slightly lower than the average for the population. The average for the population is 5.5. And this is probably related to the fact that doctors as a subgroup will have a higher IQ than the average population. The doctors guessed that their patients would give themselves a score of 2.5. In other words, a negative score for their overall quality of life. In actual fact, their patients gave themselves a score of 4.94, which is, firstly, notice two things about the score. One is that it is not that different from the score of the doctors. It is different. It's not that they gave the identical score. It is lower than the doctor's score, but not by a whole lot. It's a positive score. It's not even a neutral score of 4. It is a positive score above 4. So these patients rank their quality of life as being positive. But what's really significant was the huge difference between what the doctors expected that these people would say for their quality of life and what they actually said for their own quality of life. There was a huge statistically significant difference. So what emerges from this is that patients regard their, even ventilated paralyzed patients, generally these patients regard their quality of life as being positive, and we as doctors and as society do not realize that. This was an eye-opener for me. And I asked myself, how can this possibly be? So here's some more information from the study before I get into the question of how do we explain these outcomes. If you look at specific sub-questions with regard to quality of life, this is what emerged. When asked about their life satisfaction regarding their health, how satisfied are you with your health status? The doctors gave themselves a score of 5.7, which is average. The patients gave themselves a score of 3.8, which is a negative score. In other words, the patients aren't in denial. It's not as if they believe that everything is fine. They say, in terms of my health, it is difficult. I'm not satisfied with my health. In terms of sexual activity, the same thing. The patients gave themselves a negative score. It is hard. In terms of family life, there was no difference between life satisfaction between the doctors and their patients. And in terms of satisfaction with your housing, the patients actually scored better than the doctors. Here are some results in terms of a continuum from 1 to 7. How do you feel about your life? Do you feel that your life is hard, 1, or easy, 7? So the doctors gave themselves a score of 4, which is actually a low score. In other words, the doctor said, I regard my life as being hard. The doctors assumed that the patients would give themselves a score very low, 1.8. In reality, the patients gave themselves a score of 2.9, which is a negative score and not that different from the 1.8 that the doctor said. Do you feel that your life is boring, 1, or interesting, 7? So here the doctors gave themselves 5.4. They assumed that the patients would give themselves a negative score, but the patients gave themselves a positive score, above 4. Do you feel that your life is worthless, 1, or worthwhile? Here the doctors gave themselves a very high score. In other words, we doctors feel that our lives are hard, but worthwhile. We assume that our patients will say that they feel that their life is worthless. Patients like this must feel their life is worthless. In actual fact, the patients gave themselves a positive score, that they feel that their life is worthwhile. So here is what we've already seen, life in general. And you can see that the patient's score of 4.9 is a reflection of the kinds of answers, the kinds of scores that they gave to these questions of boring, interesting, worthless, worthwhile. The only type of question where the doctors were approximately correct was in terms of, is your life hard or easy? And I think the reason why the doctors might have been more accurate in their answer to, is the life hard or easy, as opposed to boring, interesting, or worthless, worthwhile, is because hard, easy is more of an objective finding. I can see that it's hard for you to do the following. I can see it's hard for you to be mobile. Whereas boring, interesting, worthless, worthwhile relate to somebody's inner world. And what this taught me was that it is impossible for me to know what somebody else's inner world really is. They can tell me, but it is very dangerous for me to assume that I know what any of my patients or anybody else's inner world is. And as a doctor, this is a fundamentally important realization, because there are times in my career as a doctor where I have to make decisions about somebody's life based on what I assume they would want. If they're unable to tell me, if they're in a coma, if they're a child, if they're a baby, and I have to make decisions about what kind of treatment to do. And if my assumption is that somebody who is paralyzed will automatically give themselves a score of 2.5 for how they feel their life is, that's going to impact on how I make decisions or recommendations that I make for them. So the realization that we cannot understand somebody's inner world, and we assume that their inner world is very different to what their inner world really is an important one. And I want to examine that in more detail. How is it that people who are paralyzed and on a ventilator can actually have a quality of life which is subjectively not that different from that of the doctors treating them? So why do chronically ventilated people report a relatively high life satisfaction? So I'm going to give you three types of answers. The first answer is called adaptation level theory. And adaptation level theory says the following. Adaptation level theory says that the subjective experience of a stimulus is a function not of the absolute level of that stimulation, but rather of what our past experience of that stimulus has been. In other words, the first time you experience something is always the most powerful. An experience which repeats itself, a stimulus which repeats itself over and over, becomes milder in its impact on us. We get used to things. And if you think about it, I think that you'll all realize this. If you think about experiences that you have that repeat themselves, in a medical situation, this is a well-known problem in terms of alarms in the ICU. When there's a constant beeping in the background, we know that the staff have difficulty hearing it because they're hearing it all the time and they just stop hearing it. Those of you who like challenge sports, such as the ALYN bike ride, will know that the first time you do whatever it is that gets your adrenaline going, it's really fun. But as you keep on doing it, you need to find greater challenges to get the same adrenaline rush because you get used to things. On the biological level, we can see this, for example, think of what happens when you get into a hot bath. As you get into the bath, you experience the heat and the temperature of the water the most intensely. But after 5 or 10 minutes, you do not feel it the same way as you did before, not because the temperature has dropped so much, but because that same stimulus repeating itself biologically becomes of lesser and lesser intensity. So a new experience is always a much more profound and impactful experience than the same thing repeating itself over and over. This was also true about negative experiences. The first time I drove to work and got caught in a traffic jam, it really frustrated me. Now that I know every morning that I'm going to get caught in that same traffic jam, it's something which doesn't bother me in the same way because I'm used to it. We as human beings can get used to anything. This is also true of people with disabilities. Once you have gotten it's no longer a new acute situation, but a chronic situation which you've gotten used to in a sense. The impact in a subjective level is less so. Now, and I'm not speaking about pain. I'm speaking about disability without pain. Over time, that somebody has had a chance to eventually accept and understand that that is the new routine of their life. So adaptation level theory can explain to us how it is that people with chronic disabilities can actually get used to their situation and not experience it as a form of suffering on a day-to-day basis, even though we from the outside might think that it is. So here's a second way of understanding how it can be that people with chronic disabilities and severe disabilities can still experience life satisfaction. And this is logotherapy. Logotherapy was developed by Dr. Viktor Frankl, and I'm sure that many of you know of Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a neurologist. He lived through the Holocaust, and during the Holocaust, he confronted the question, he asked himself the question, how is it that people survive during the experience of the Holocaust in a concentration camp. And this became the basis of his theory of logotherapy, which subsequently became the basis of all psychotherapy to this day. And the summary sentence of logotherapy is that people are primarily driven by a striving to find meaning in life, not a striving for happiness or a striving for money, but a striving for meaning. And it is this sense of meaning that gives people the ability to overcome any difficulty. It's also this sense of meaning which gives people a feeling of satisfaction and achievement. Now, this is true for every human being. It's true also for somebody with a disability. You can find meaning in your life, even if you have a disability. And when you feel that you are achieving that which has meaning, it gives you a sense of satisfaction. And that is therefore a way in which any human being can be understood to feel life satisfaction. What is meaningful for you? And are you achieving it? Are you coming close to achieving it? And this isn't negated by the fact that you might have a disability. So logotherapy gives us an insight into how it is that other people, even with significant disabilities, can achieve life satisfaction. And the third explanation that I want to present to you emerges from the literature which examines the connection between money and life satisfaction. And what I want to show you is that the type of connection between wealth and life satisfaction is the same as the connection between health status and life satisfaction. So let's have a look at that for a few minutes. What do we know from the medical literature about the relationship between wealth and life satisfaction? So this is the result of a study which is done every year by the Pew Research Center. They ask a group of people, and this is in the United States, generally, how would you say things are going these days for you in your life? And what emerges is that fully 84% of people in the United States generally say that they are either pretty happy or very happy. And only about 15% report that they are not too happy. In other words, most of us are generally feel positive about life. This is interesting because most of the research into quality of life focuses on the 15% who aren't so happy. But there is research looking at the majority who are happy. So let's have a look at this. This is actually very interesting because this is the percentage of people in the United States who reported that they are either pretty happy or very happy, and it's in the region of 85%. And you can see that from the 1950s until the year 2000, it has remained constant every year. In the black, you see the mean disposable income of American society. This is a reflection of the overall wealth of the United States, corrected for inflation over the course of the years. And what you can see over here is that from the 1960s to the year 2000, the mean disposable income went up 3 times, but yet the overall percentage of people who said that they were happy remained exactly the same. So this implies to us, or at least it suggests, that there isn't a direct connection between how much money you have and how happy you are likely to feel. Now, here is some more data from that same study. If you look at subgroups of income, and you look at what percentage of people say that they are not too happy in the red, pretty happy in the blue, or very happy in the green, what you see is exactly the opposite of what I've just shown you. These are the people who earn the least every year, and these are the people who earn the most. And you can see very clearly that the red, which is those who say they're not so happy, goes down as you're earning more. And the green bar, which is the percentage of people who say they're very happy, clearly goes up. As you earn more money, you are far more likely to say that you are very happy and far less likely to say that you are not too happy. So this graph seems to imply that there's a clear connection between how much money you earn and the likelihood that you will say that you are very happy or not so happy. So there is apparently a contradiction between these two sets of data that I've just presented to you, and how can we understand that? So the answer to this apparent contradiction emerges from a third study, which is very interesting. This is a theoretical study, which is carried out on a large group of students. And in this study, they asked the students to imagine two theoretical scenarios, two life scenarios, which you could live your life in one of two ways. The first life scenario is that you will earn $50,000 a year, and all of your friends will earn $25,000 a year. Or you could choose to live a life in which you will earn $100,000 a year and your friends $200,000 a year. And the question is, which life would you like to live? Okay, so each of you can think of this for yourselves. And everybody will have their own answer. But when you ask a large group of people what they choose, this is what they tend to say. The majority say that they would prefer to earn less, but more than their friends. The minority say that they would prefer to earn more, even if it is substantially less than their friends. Okay, so this is a cynical outcome, right? But what it says to us is that we are social. We realize that if I constantly see that everybody around me is being more successful than me, I'm going to feel frustrated. In other words, my satisfaction with my income, my satisfaction with the amount of wealth that I have is a relative thing. It is relative to what my expectation is. And where do I draw my expectation from? From what I see around me, from what my friends are doing, from what my family is achieving. So the majority of people recognize that life satisfaction is a function of what my expectations are. Expectation of wealth is more important than the absolute degree of wealth in terms of our satisfaction with our wealth. So we can summarize it by saying that life satisfaction is a function of the discrepancy between one's expectation and one's reality. There is always a gap between the two. Everybody has got expectations and a reality which is less than those expectations. Because when your reality meets those expectations, you just build new expectations. They've studied this, for example, in people who have won the lottery. And what they find is that people who have filled out these questionnaires about life satisfaction and then happen to win a lottery, they come back to them and they ask them to fill out the same questionnaire later. And what happens is that immediately before winning the lottery, they'll give themselves 5.5 out of 7. Immediately after winning the lottery, they report 7 out of 7. But a year later, their score has returned to 5.5. Why? Because immediately after winning, all of their expectations ostensibly had been met. After they have adjusted to their new reality, they just build a new set of expectations. They want something more. In Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, it's expressed this way: Ezehu ashir hasameach b'chelko. Who is the wealthy person? The person who is satisfied with what they have. You are satisfied with your wealth when you don't have an expectation for much more wealth. And the same thing is true about your health status. You will be satisfied with your health status when you accept it and don't have an expectation for your health to be substantially different from what it is at the moment. So this is a way in which we can understand how people who from the outside would seem to have an awful health status, but if they have become adjusted to it and have accepted it, if they've gotten used to and internalized their health status and they don't have an expectation for it to suddenly change, they can develop a degree of satisfaction with both with their health status and with everything else about their life. So I want to illustrate this to you from something that I see in my day-to-day work here at ALYN with patients with, severe medical problem, which brings them to ALYN for rehabilitation and what happens to them. And I'm going to tell you about a typical case of, let's say, a teenage boy who suddenly is involved in a motor vehicle accident or a sports accident and sustains a broken neck, a severe injury, which leaves a person paralyzed from the neck down. So presumably before the accident, this person would have given themselves a life satisfaction score of 5.5 out of 7, right? And then they're involved in an accident and they wake up suddenly in an intensive care unit on a ventilator, paralyzed. There's no question that they, at that point, give themselves a score of 1 out of 7. And this remains like that during the course of their hospitalization. And then they are transferred to us here at ALYN for rehabilitation. And what we see is that during the course of the rehabilitation, their mood will go up and down as the rehabilitation progresses. But as long as they still remain fundamentally with the same neurological problem of paralysis of their whole body, even if they now learn how to sit, learn how to move around, learn how to work a computer, what happens is that after a period of time, they reach a point of crisis when they say, wow, I have worked, I have prayed, I have been cooperative, I've done everything that I can. And after several months of rehabilitation, I am still attached to this ventilator and I'm still in a wheelchair. And that is a point of crisis. And they have a emotional, psychological crisis where their life satisfaction, apparently, it seems, drops back to 1. As they say, how are things going to ever get any better? And if this doesn't happen, by the way, I'm concerned because it implies something not healthy in the person's insight and psychology. And what happens is that they remain in this state of crisis for a period of time until they reach a point in which they say to themselves, you know what, this isn't going to change. And once they are able to say to themselves, this isn't going to change, and they accept the new reality, the next question that they raise is, so what am I going to do about my new situation? And then starts a process of looking for new purpose in life. And a person these people tend to say to themselves, okay, this is now my new situation, but I still have my family, or I still have my music, or the internet, or my studies. They search for those things which are meaningful and which give them satisfaction. And as that happens, after they've accepted their new reality and internalized it, and they start changing their expectations, their life satisfaction starts going up. The gap between their expectations and their reality starts becoming smaller again. Earlier on, they're expecting the expectations of their previous life. As they adjust their expectations, they start developing more of a sense of life satisfaction. And the research on these people shows that they eventually reach on generally an average of 4.5 out of 7, which is also a positive number, but it's a bit less than that of the Duchenne's patients, my Duchenne's patients, who their score, if you remember, was an average 4.9 out of 7, even though from a medical point of view, they're in an almost identical situation, same age, same type of limitation. I think that the reason why these patients score lower is because they still have some expectations that hold over from their more recent past. Whereas for my patients with Duchenne's, the process of deterioration has happened over many, many years, and they've gotten used to their situation very gradually over time and have less of a memory and an expectation from their past. So the whole dynamic of new expectations resulting in a difference in your sense of quality of life plays out in a very, very real way during the rehabilitation of my patients with something like a spinal cord injury and recent onset of paralysis. Now, why is it, if indeed this is what a lot of people many people with disabilities, if they do feel life satisfaction that is positive, why is it that we, both as professionals and as society as a whole, we do not realize that? So I want to offer two possible answers. One is, I think that we project from ourselves onto them, and we say to ourselves, when we see somebody who is completely technology dependent and paralyzed, we say, if I were to be in that situation, I would give myself a 1 out of 7. And therefore, that's what that person must be giving themselves. But that's not a legitimate assumption to make, because you're looking at somebody, firstly, who is in a different world to what you are. You're looking at somebody who is not in acute pain. You're looking at somebody who has had a whole period of time to come to terms with their reality, and you do not know what their internal world is and how they have come to terms with that reality. So I think that we project what we would be feeling in the acute situation onto somebody who is not in that acute situation. And I think another mistake that we make is that we confuse disability with pain. They're not the same thing. Somebody who is in pain does not have life satisfaction, but somebody with a disability is not the same as somebody who is in pain. And we need to remember that difference. In conclusion and in ending, I want to share with you an anecdote, something which happened to me. Over here, this is Shlomi Amoyal, who was a patient of mine here at ALYN. He had Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and he was fully ventilator dependent and paralyzed. And despite that, he attended the Bezalel Academy of Art, and he was actually an accomplished artist. And on the right side of the screen over here, you see a painting that he did in the style of Jackson Pollock. Those of you who like modern art will know that Jackson Pollock did paintings in which he felt that the painting itself does not have to reflect a concrete expression of the outside world. So the colors were spread on the canvas in what may seem to you to be a random way, but was not necessarily. But this is a painting that Shlomi did. It's actually very large. It measures about 2 meters by 3 meters in size, and it's hanging over here in ALYN. And he did this painting, by the way, by spreading the canvas on the floor, and he took a feeding bag and tube and mounted it on his wheelchair and put paint in it, and then opened the tap so that it dripped at a different rate, depending on what he wanted, and drove his wheelchair back and forth over the canvas to create this painting in the style of Jackson Pollock. So why am I showing this to you? Not because I particularly do like it or don't like it. I mean, everybody can have their own personal taste in art. But Shlomi Amoyal loved it. He got a lot of satisfaction from his artwork. So one day I went up to him when I was preparing a lecture like this on life satisfaction. And I said to him, Shlomi, what score would you give yourself out of 7 for your life satisfaction? And he looked at me and he said, 6. 6 out of 7. This is a fully paralyzed, ventilated young man living at ALYN. But his artwork and his life of studying and performing and implementing art gave him a lot of satisfaction. And then I had a thought, and I said to him, Shlomi, what do you think I, your doctor, would give myself? And he looks at me and he says, 5 out of 7. And I found this very disconcerting because he was right. That's, I would have given myself approximately 5.5 out of 7 for my life satisfaction. And I went home thinking to myself, how is it that my paralyzed, ventilated patient has a subjective life satisfaction? Not only is it more than mine, but he knows it. He looks at me and he can tell that I'm stressed. I've got a lot of stress at work. I've got a lot of other things on my plate. He seems to be enjoying his life more than I'm enjoying mine. He had insight and he saw that I wasn't as relaxed and happy about my life as he was with his. Now, I don't want to be paralyzed and ventilated, but it did say to me, what is it about my life that I am not quite getting? So I learned a lot from that, and I learned a lot about the importance of life satisfaction from this type of research and this understanding of what generates life satisfaction. And that's what I wanted to share with you this evening. I'd like you to understand how it is that technology-dependent individuals can and often do have good quality of life, that there are many factors that influence quality of life. For example, the time of onset of the disability is obviously significant, especially when we look at children who are born with a disability as opposed to an adult who might have a more recent onset. This is obviously going to affect what their expectations are from their quality of life. And generally, the children who I see over here with disabilities, they're not questioning why they can't do something. They just live their life and want to play. As they get older, they will start questioning, why is it that I'm different from some of my friends? And they have to deal with that, and we have to help them. But, you know, acute onset versus something which happened a long time ago does make a difference to how you feel about your health status here and now. As I've mentioned, chronic pain is very different from disability and has an impact on quality of life. And the presence of a support system has an impact on how you feel you are able to participate in society and therefore enjoy your life. So mobility and the ability to access the world and technologies are very important in providing quality of life to people with disabilities. These 4 factors over here on the screen are all fundamental determinants of whether somebody is likely to feel that they have quality of life or that they do not have quality of life. And I think it is our responsibility as society to help provide them with a support system and mobility and accessibility so as to maximize everybody's potential enjoyment of life. This amounts to enabling participation as much as possible in society. And this really is the bottom line of what we're trying to achieve here in our work at ALYN. And I'm just going to conclude by showing you a few pictures that were taken just about a month ago. These are children from my department, all of whom are highly technology dependent. These are all children on ventilators with their parents. And what you're seeing over here is you're seeing them visit a local attraction where we took them all on a picnic with their parents, just so that they could enjoy the outside world with their parents, and their parents could have the experience of participating in the types of activities that we all take for granted, and for them to learn and to see that having to use technology does not mean that you cannot participate to the max, to the most of your ability in world around you, and actually have quality of life which is sustainable and satisfying for you. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions which anybody has. And I hope that this has given you insight into how our approach here at ALYN to quality of life impacts on the way we do our work. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Berry. That was a fascinating presentation, and thank you again for all the work you do at ALYN Hospital. Before I go to questions, I have something from Paula Glazier here. She thought you might want to elaborate on what vented kids can do because of ALYN, like swimming pool, and how ALYN uses same equipment as would be used at home to help families get used to using it in a safe hospital setting.
And the question is, what are ventilated children able to do, given that they are on ventilators?
Yes, it's that, and also how ALYN has set up quite a few things that you wouldn't expect ventilated kids to do.
So the truth of the matter is that the fact that the child is on a ventilator is not in any way the major determinant of what they can and cannot do, because all of their equipment is completely portable and mobile, and we very much try to break through the psychological barrier which many people have, many parents have, which says that if my child is technology dependent, ventilator dependent, I have to somehow cushion them and protect them from the outside world. You do have to make preparations so as to be able to participate in activities, but we teach our families that they can participate in almost everything. Even, for example, swimming in a swimming pool. We are one of the few places in the world in which ventilated children swim in the swimming pool. We have developed a way in which they can do so with the ventilator being supported above the water on a support tray. And we have trained the parents and the staff how to hold the child so that the water does not cover their ventilation tube, but they can be in a swimming pool and enjoy being in a swimming pool. Why do we do that? Not because it makes any substantial change to their medical condition, but because swimming is a part of life for a child. And we want them to learn that they should participate as much as they can in life. You have to make preparations. You have to, you can't just arrive and expect to be able to participate. You have to find out if there is accessibility. You have to have the right equipment with you. But there are very few things which cannot at all be done because you are technology dependent today. You can do many, many things. It depends to a large extent on whether society around is enabling you to participate. So these children go to school. At school, there will be an attendant who has learned how to take care of their ventilator and the fact that they have a tracheostomy, but there's no reason why they can't participate in school, and they do. And they participate even in regular schools. They just have to have the assistant on site at the school to be able to take care of the needs that they might have with the ventilator. So in truth, there is very little. The only thing that I can think of, which I don't think that a ventilated child could ever do, is something like skydiving. But almost anything else, with preparation, you can do it. We've had, our children go to amusement parks and participate on the rides. You just have to make appropriate provisions ahead of time.
Thank you. A couple of questions from Davida, and I think the first one you kind of touched on. It says, do you find a correlation between the age a child is first injured and a higher or lower Campbell's score when they come to terms with their realities?
So children are at terms with their reality all the time. It is adults who have more of an understanding of what their reality, what they expect their reality should be, and then see a difference between their expectation and their reality, who have to come to terms with it. But even children with the most, what would seem to us, severe disabilities, they take that as a given. They live their life based on their reality being a given, in the same way, just to try and illustrate it, as I do not live my life wondering why it is that I cannot fly. I just take that as a given. Young children take their reality as a given and they run with it in that sense. They flow with it. Older children, when children start developing a social awareness and compare themselves to their peers, they do have to, that is a challenge and has to be dealt with. It's a challenge that has to be dealt with every adolescent. And it's the same for a child with disabilities as well. But I don't see it, I don't really know of a difference between age of onset. I think more what's relevant is how acute the onset is. If a child has got a sudden onset of a disability, then there is a period of adjustment that can be very difficult immediately afterwards. When it's a very, very gradual onset, then the issue is much less.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned that you do ask doctors how they think the children with disabilities would rate their own Campbell's score. Have you ever asked the parents what they think their child's Campbell's score is?
I've never asked the parents. I have spoken to parents about it in trying to help parents understand what their child's reality is. The difficulty here is that when you look at the research done on parents themselves, it emerges that parents of children with severe disabilities often have very low life satisfaction scores, because a parent does not give up on their dream of what they would like and expect for their child. So what I've told you about this evening about how people with disabilities have positive life satisfaction, this is the people themselves. Parents of a child have a more difficult time, and they need a lot of support and understanding. And I don't think it would be correct to say that the parents get used to it and adjust, and they are the ones who live constantly with the awareness of what they would have liked or what used to be and what isn't now. So it is much more of a challenge for the parents in that sense than it is for the children, and we have to be sensitive to that and aware of that. I don't know what the value would be of asking parents what they think their child's Campbell's score is, because I think that they'd be very much influenced by their immediate reality that they're experiencing.
Right. Do you think there's a difference between a family support system, a medical support system, friends support when it comes to quality of life? Is there a study that shows which might help a disabled child feel better?
So I don't know of a studies, but I have no doubt personally, based on my experience, that the most effective support system is a family support system. And if you can never replace that with a medical support system. Now, adults, as you get older, family just becomes less of a realistic option, because your family are getting older as well, and adults have to be independent. And then then people build their own support system. And that might be based on hired help, helpers who are live-in help, and that they have to be the basis of the support system. But I'd point out to you that this phenomenon of requiring a support system is true for every one of us. We all require a support system, be it emotional or physical. So I am, 61 years old. I still require an emotional support system from key people in my life, who are my basis of emotional support. When you're younger, when you're a child, or if you have a disability, you require physical support systems and emotional support systems. But the need for support systems is a constant for all of us. At the same time, we also require independence. In other words, to be independent of that support system, to be able to do our own thing, to not all the time be accompanied by someone necessarily. And that's the importance of providing people with mobility and with ability to be independent. So there's this balance between a support system that's there to help you and independence, where you're doing things on your own, which all of us require both of them in balance. And this is true for people with physical disabilities as well. And they have to find the balance between them. And it might be family, and it might be an aid, and it might be a medical system. At different stages in life, you have to find the one which is most realistic and most appropriate for you. For children, it's undoubtedly the family.
Right. Now, you mentioned this, finding out about all these studies changed you as a doctor. Can you give an example of how it changes your approach to what you do?
I think the most dramatic example of that is when I see doctors, when confronted with having to make life and death decisions about treatment, yes or no, for people who cannot tell them what they want, such as if you're treating an unconscious patient, or if you have to decide whether to do a resuscitation or not in an acute situation. And the doctors, when I speak to them, when we speak about how do we go about making such decisions, doctors say, well, what quality of life will a person have if they've undergone brain damage? And that's an almost universal starting point in such discussions, So somebody has, I'm faced here with somebody who is, I have to decide whether I'm going to resuscitate them, and I know that they're likely to have a degree, even a significant degree of brain damage. And a lot of people say, well, if you've got a degree of brain damage, how can you possibly enjoy life? What is your life worth? What quality of life will somebody have if they've got significant brain damage, and that leads them to the conclusion of, so it's not worth investing. But it also manifests as people who say, well, if a child's got significant cerebral palsy, why invest so much resources in treating them? Because what quality of life can they have? You know, and when I realized that they have to tell us what quality of life they have, and when they do, it is very rare that they say that they do not want to live. People do sometimes say that, but it's almost always in the context of somebody who is in chronic pain or who doesn't have a support system. And, you know, what I found is that almost always when the person has got a support system and is not in chronic pain, they build their own quality of life. And I have to respect their right to that. And often doctors don't. And that's the most dramatic manifestation of, you know, what this research has done for me. And when I teach it to medical students, I can see that it's changing the whole way in which they relate to, how do we relate to people with chronic disabilities, or people who, the decisions that I have to make for them will impact on whether they live or whether they die or not.
Interesting. And this last question I have here, I'm not sure I quite understand it. It says, does virtual reality therapy help with their quality of life when they aren't using it? I'm not sure what that means, but I'm reading it verbatim here. It was an anonymous person.
Okay, so all I can tell you is that virtual reality technologies have a significant role to play in the world of disabilities. As a therapeutic tool, because we can use virtual reality as a way of helping people to do therapies, and also just as a form of entertainment, in the same way that I can enjoy virtual reality for escapism, for entertainment, so too somebody with a disability can enjoy virtual reality for the same reason, and that's very important. I do not think, or I do not know of in any way, virtual reality being important as a way of escaping the world that I'm actually in. If that's a world of pain or limitation, I do not know whether virtual reality is a way of escaping that or not. It might be that that was the thought that's underlying the question. So I can't really speak to that, but I can say that, you know, use of technology is something that all of us are doing every single day. Right? We are all technology dependent to some degree or other. You know, I myself happen to be technology dependent, and we all use technology for a variety of different reasons. And, you know, virtual reality, communications technology through computers, using a computer to learn, to communicate. These are all tools. These are tools to enable, which can enable us to participate in life, to enjoy life, and therefore they have their importance and their validity. In that sense, they are just as important to people with disabilities as to all of us.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions, but of course, as I have done on previous calls, when I start summing up, some questions come in. So this is a last call for questions. As I mentioned in my introduction, we will be distributing a video of this presentation to all of you tomorrow morning and posting on our YouTube channel, where you will also have the opportunity to donate to ALYN if you feel so inclined, and I hope you do. And please look forward to the next in our series in January, and please forward this video to your friends, families, and neighbors and invite them to the next presentation. If anybody has any ideas of what they'd like to learn about from ALYN, please submit it, write me an email or write to Mayan. We'll see if we can schedule something that interests the majority of you. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Berry, again. This was very thought-provoking, very interesting. And I'm glad that I'm retired, so I'm on the upswing again in quality of life. So I'm glad that you proved that I do feel somewhat happy about my quality of life.
Better. Yeah.
Yes. So if any of you or our donors would like to host the next series, as I am doing now, please let me know. Thanks again to all. And remember, it is our support, their success. Thanks again, everyone. And thanks again, Dr. Berry. It was terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.